family unit if we can. The family is very important. You need to go out of your way. If it means ask forgiveness, humble yourself. God will bless that. If it means standing up for your right, then stand up for it. But today, our lesson is on society. And that got me all excited. Because I was reading this week. Let me see if I can find it right quick. In Habakkuk. Habakkuk, the very first chapter. Well, wait a minute. Well, I got it. I thought it was 13. It's 14. In the first chapter of Habakkuk, Habakkuk's saying, hey, God, don't you see what's going on around here? I mean, like he doesn't know what's going on around here right now? Right. Because why? Because he's in control. And that gives Christians a lot of peace of mind knowing that he's in control. Habakkuk 1, 2 through 4 said, how long, O Lord, must I cry for help? But you do not listen. Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. And I thought, man, are you speaking to me? Because, you wonder, God, how long are you going to let all this go? How long did he let Sodom and Gomorrah go? Their children were sacrificed in the fire. They had all kind of perverted sex stuff. And he let them go until they hung themselves. And then he said, hey, I just wipe them out. Well, look how long he let the earth go. And then he said, Noah, let's build us an ark. And it took 100 years to build this ark. So it wasn't an overnight thing. He has not forgotten what's going on right here, right now. But our lesson today is about society. The Bible speaks to society. This Sunday school book probably was written a year or two ago. How did they know? Do you think it was a coincidence that we should all need this right now? This is God's message to society. All right. I neither. I guess if they're not tearing up or well, in the last days they're going to call good evil and evil good. So, you know, we shouldn't even be surprised. Right, right. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen it. We quit watching the news. We don't buy a newspaper. And really and truly, most of my stuff comes from Facebook. And I don't know how much of that is accurate. But hey, they interviewed the dumbest people in California. And it was hilarious how stupid these people are. They interviewed this one woman, and they said, "We're having the 4th of July, means Independence Day. What does that mean to you?" And she said that the North beat the South. Now, how about that? And you're going, huh? Did she go to history class ever? They interviewed this one man, and they said, "Who is Joe Biden?" And he said, "I don't know. Who is he?" These people are going to vote. Are they going to vote for whoever tells them to? I thought, heaven forbid. We do have some dumb people that do not take an interest, but they go out and they vote. Oh, they interviewed this one guy and said, "Did you hear about the President Kennedy getting killed this morning?" And this guy said, "That is awful for a president to be killed." And he was killed in 63. You just wonder, where have they been all these years? It was an eye opener that these people are going to be allowed to go vote. All right, George, I've run my mouth long enough. Hey, don't put me on a soapbox.
You can't believe everything's on Facebook. Saturday, they're supposed to kill all white people, they said. That's hogwash. All that stuff on there. Yeah, that ain't it, girl. But anyhow, we blessed people. We are blessed people. We're a blessed country. These scriptures, you want me to read?
The lesson overview and the golden text.
All right, the scripture passages as well known. Volumes have been written about this about each one. Yet today they offer various glimpses in the redeemed narrate the greatest story we share as Christians. Moses presents the law of God, especially the Ten Commandments, to the generation that did not come out of Egypt. They, like their parents before them, they must keep their end of the Messianic covenant if they are not experiencing God's blessing. Paul's masterful weaves together various elements of the redeemed theology, beginning with what one might call natural law in Romans 1, to apply the principles as practiced as one local socialist. Golden text, Deuteronomy 5:33. We shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may live and that you may be well within you. Walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live, prosper, and prolong your days in the land that will possess. In Proverbs, it says in Proverbs, you can prolong your life or you can shorten your life. People shorten their life by drinking, drugs, wild, crazy things they do. But hey, we're blessed that we know God, and God knows us. He knows every hair on my head, and I ain't got many. So
it don't take him long.
he knows us. He knows my name.
Right. Yeah, and when we get to heaven, we'll have a new name. All right. The Bible presents God's commands. These are the commands that God gave Moses. Irvine, you want to read that?
Deuteronomy 5, 6 through 22, and verse 32 and 33. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make thee any graven images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the waters beneath the earth. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. Honor thy father and thy mother, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee, that thy days may be prolonged, and that it may go well with thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, neither shalt thou bear false witness against thy neighbor. Thou shalt not desire thy neighbor's wife, neither shalt thou covet thy neighbor's house, his field, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is thy neighbor's. As in Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy begin with the reminder that God's graciousness toward the Israelites. It was God who delivered Israel from the Egyptian oppression in Deuteronomy 5 and 6. Because of God's kindness to Israel, they were to live before him in certain ways. First, the people were to have no other gods before the true God, but one true God. Second, they were not to be like their pagan neighbors in fashioning an image of God. God is distinct and different from the world he created. Third, his people are not to profane the name of God. To profane God's name is to make it common, to fail to give it the reverence it deserves, because God's name is the name by which he has made himself known. Finally, God's old covenant people were to keep the Sabbath. The Sabbath was to be a time for bodily rest and worship of the one true God. In keeping the Sabbath, Israel would show their trust in God to care for their daily needs. Moses continues with announcing these commands, which addresses one's relationship with other human beings. To honor parents is a lifelong, non-negotiable. Societies that care for the elderly tend to be successful and stable societies. To kill is to murder. In other places in the Old Testament, God sanctions killing but never murder. To commit adultery is to break the marriage vows. At times, it refers to any sex outside of marriage, and idolatry, which often includes illicit sex. To steal is to take another's possessions without the owner's knowledge or consent. To bear false witness can be understood as to lie in general, although here it is linked to lying in a court of law. Neither is one to desire or covet what God has blessed others with. One is to be content with his blessings. Finally, following these commands is something Israel must do all the days of their lives if they want to know God's blessings.
You know, many years ago, they had a culture, and next week we're gonna see about cultures, different cultures. You know, the Italians, they have a culture. The Spanish have a culture. The blacks have a culture. The Mexicans have a culture, and we have a culture. I would say that it's trying to be wiped out, but we're not going to go there. Societies that care for the elderly tend to be successful and stable societies. The Japanese really honored their elderly people. They thought they were wise, but they're getting away from that because of the Western influence. And I hate that because it was such a wonderful thing. Now, I'm not saying everybody there, but the tendency is to not honor like they did. So I wonder sometimes if that's not why the influence of Japan is losing its definition or its meaning in society. Christians can influence society, sometimes politically, sometimes you just have to live it. We are all called to testify to society. Whether we do this politically or not, we're all called to testify. Why? Because we all have a story. You all have a testimony, and you all have a story to tell. The beginning of the Mosaic law that God handed down had to do with the relationship between man and God. Moses, speaking to the generation of Israelites, they don't remember how they came out, how their parents or their grandparents came out of Egypt. So he has to reiterate, he has to remind them of the influence that God had on the Israelites. How about just the fact that he fed them every day? And when they griped and complained about manna, he gave them meat. So he has to remind them. And the stories have to be continually told. You have to share your story with other people. You have to share this story with your children, with your grandchildren, with anybody who will listen, really. Verses 7 through 15 outline how Israel was to relate to the God who saved them. He's telling them, this is what I expect you to do for me. I expect you to honor me. I expect it to be a one-on-one relationship. I expect you to honor me. You don't go out here and use God's name in vain. You don't, and that doesn't mean cursing per se. Of course, I hate that too, but it means any kind of, a lot of times I watch a lot of HGTV, and a lot of times these people go in their house that's been redone. Oh my God! And I think, who are you calling on, honey? If you don't know him, don't call on him just in passing. You call on him when you want reverence to him. Was that the right word? The people were to have no gods before the one true God. And I read something when I was reading the other day. He has a new name to me. In Exodus, God says, do not worship any other God for the Lord, whose name is jealous. He has a new name. He's a jealous God. He's a jealous God, and he don't want you to have anybody. Hey, he created you. This other person didn't. This TV didn't. He created you so that he could have a relationship with you. Not so you could have a relationship with the TV or with anything else that takes the place of God. So, they would be tempted to do so. They were going into the promised land, which was filled with false gods. So he knew that that's what was going to happen, and that they better not go over there and start worshiping false gods. But they did. He created the world. let him out of the box. There's a song, and it said that they put God in a box. You limit what he can do and what he can do for you, what he can do for your family. You limit him by your prayers. God is a jealous God who doles out judgment on those who disobey him and mercy to those who keep his commandments. You know, in Deuteronomy 28, it said blessings and curses. If we do these things, there are blessings that are coming. Hey, he runs over you trying to give them to you. But also there's curses. He may run over you trying to get them too. To profane God's name is to make it common. And that's what I meant by them using it with a lack of reverence. To fail to give it reverence it deserves, because God's name is the name by which he has made himself known to Israel, to us, because we're adopted. We're adopted children. What about he fed them? Their clothes didn't wear out. In Egypt, they had people beating on them and making them work all the time. All these people had to do was just worship God. That's all he asked, just worship. The second part of the Ten Commandments is your relationship with other people. To honor your parents. He promises, I'll give you long life if you honor your parents. It's the bedrock for society is found in strong families. And we don't have strong families much anymore. I'm not saying we don't have them. I'm just saying they're not as strong as they are. I think, this is my opinion, a lot of it has to do with the drugs, because drugs alter how you perceive things, how you interact with other people. And even prescribed medicine has an effect on you. It's like you can take all this medicine that the doctor gives you, and I was a nurse for 34 years, so I'm not saying anything against doctors or pills or anything else. But I am saying they are overprescribed. To kill. We don't want to kill anybody. To commit adultery. To steal. To bear false witness can be understood as lying in general. But specifically, they're talking about lying in court. You go to court, and it used to mean something. When you put your hand on the Bible and you said, I swear whatever I say is the truth. Well, how many people have they caught lying? It's called, if they weren't lying, there wouldn't be a perjury. All right. Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry. That's the point. Income tax. Yeah. Yeah. How many people fudge on their income tax? Yeah, you're right. It involves one's integrity. And that's integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And I try to remember that no matter what. If you see something on the side of the road, pick it up. That's integrity. Because even if the guy next door is not looking, God's looking. And he's saying, hey, you care about what my earth looks like. The word desire is the same as covet. If you desire your neighbor's wife or anything that he has, that is covet. We walk according to all of God's commands, and then they will experience his blessings. Well, Jesus summed up all the law as love for God and love for one's neighbor. That summed up all the 10 commandments. If you do those two things, you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. That takes care of the first part. And if you love your neighbor as yourself, that took care of the second part. So Jesus summed it up for us. Mr. Smith, the Bible warns of sin's consequences, and there is always consequences when you sin.
Romans 1:21 through 32. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Because that, when they knew God, shows that people have an innate ability to recognize him. Although people knew God, they failed to glorify him. Instead of glorifying God, people gave themselves to all sorts of sin. The two sins Paul focuses on are ways in which people glorify someone or something other than God. Some committed the sin of idolatry. In addition to committing the sin of idolatry, some committed sexual sins. As a result of these sexual sins, people receive their due penalty, God's condemnation. Paul continues to catalog man's sins with a lengthy list of vices. Notice the list includes both murder and disobedience to parents. There is a tendency for people to justify their lifestyles by saying they're not as bad as someone else. Paul's list of vices allows no people to justify themselves before a righteous God. In verse 32, Paul acknowledges that people who commit various kinds of sin do so knowing that it is wrong. Those who continue in sin are worthy of death. That is, both spiritual and physical death. What is worse, people are not content to commit sin individually, but also encourage others to engage in sinful behavior. In doing so, they become the worst kind of evangelists, ones who propagate bad news, the sentence of death on all who continue a lifestyle of sin.
Paul notes, instead of glorifying God, people gave themselves to all sorts of sin. And I have never forgotten, in the other Sunday school book, it said, why do people sin? Because they want to. And, you know, they don't have to, but we were born in sin, and they choose to. The two sins Paul focuses on are ways in which people glorify someone or something other than God. The Jewish people had a long history of worshiping false gods. However, the Greco-Roman world of Paul's day was steeped in false gods and idols to represent each focus that they had. They would think up and make up a new god. They worshiped the sunshine. They worshiped the rain. They worshiped different animals. It was a strange thing. And they thought we were crazy because we worship something we can't see. But then we go back and we say, hey, Jesus said, blessed are the ones who I can't think. Yeah, that believe, but they don't see. They haven't seen God, but they believe in Him anyway. To include another sexual sin, the sin of homosexuality. As a result of these sexual sins, people receive their due penalty, God's condemnation. And I'm not going to get on that bandwagon about homosexuality, because too many people are yay, nay, and it just leads to an argument. But I know that God is not a God of homosexuality. One man, one woman. With all these vices that he is coming up with, there's a tendency for people to justify their lifestyle by saying, hey, well, I don't murder and I don't steal. I don't commit adultery. But there's other sins. There's other sins that when we get closer and closer to Jesus and we see the perfection of Him, we look at ourselves and we say, hey, do I do that? Remember the flashlight. And God takes that little flashlight and looks in our heart. Do we have animosity here? Do we have gluttony here? Do we have unforgiveness here? What does God say? Only when we ask Him, He will show us. A lot of people don't want to know. That's why they don't ask. Right. But individually, we need to ask God to point these things out to us. Say, hey, am I guilty of this? Have I done that? And let Him show us. Because we sure don't want to be spiritually or physically dead in the sight of God. We sure don't want to separate ourselves from God. We want to have that relationship always. No one, let's see, where am I? They're not as bad as someone else. No one to justify him or herself before a righteous God. You can't be as good as you think you are and justify yourself before God. You can't do it. Because He knows you. He knows everything about you. He knows what you think. He knows how you feel. He knows your motive behind what you do. So you're not going to justify yourself to Him. And I had to come back, and we all know that we've all sinned. We've all sinned, and we come short of the glory of God. Right. 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 And that's why you read it. That's why you read the Bible and you study, is so that you will know, that you will know what's happening. And I had a thought when you were talking that sometimes we have known sin. You know, we don't go out and kill somebody, but do we have a rotten attitude? Or there's some things that are I want to say no, not unknown sin, but not known sin. You know, we have an attitude that's wrong, or we fudge on this, or we don't take that back, or we don't do something that God tells us to do. And I think that's my biggest one, is that he'll say, Charlene, you need to go do this. And I'm either too lazy or I make an excuse, but I don't do it.
Sister Arlene.
Yes.
We need to ask ourselves, you know, are we doing wrong? But Paul said in verse 32, said Paul acknowledges that people who commit various kinds of sin do so knowing that it is wrong.
Known sin. But known sin. Sometimes, though, we do things like we have a bad attitude towards somebody, and God has to say, hey, that ain't right. That ain't right. We don't realize it at that time. Well, yeah. We don't acknowledge it. How about that? We might know it, but we don't acknowledge it. At the time when this lesson was written, a large chain store decided to allow men into their ladies' restroom. The American Family Association reported it and launched a petition. Hoping to reverse the decision, American Family Association, Walgreens' new policy welcomes men into women's restroom. February 8, 2018. Time will tell if the AFA petition is effective, but is that enough for Christians? Some Christians pray silently and take no social action. Other Christians are so action-oriented that they take little time to pray. Maybe we should start by asking, do our Bible and Christian values intersect with society at all? We have a responsibility as Christians to society. And a lot of times we sit back and we keep our mouth shut thinking, well, God's in control. But sometimes he expects us to make a stand, to say, hey, I am not going to compromise this way. If it means boycotting, if it means, what do you call it, marching around, yeah. What? Can't think of the word. But going around and petitioning in front of the store. Whatever it means, to you. But we have to make a stand on the values that we hold dear to our heart. And I have other things, but I won't go there. You're right. One woman. Right. That's right. The same way we let that woman take prayer out of school. Right. Right. That's right. Right. Because God didn't do anything. But He expects us to stand up and say, this is not right. This is not going to be a good thing, and we as Christians are not going to stand for it. We have to. On a funny note, on my Facebook thing, it said, all these monuments that have been tore down, they're going to put one of Trump up. I thought that was so funny. But anyway, I'll shut up. The Bible reveals a forgiving God. Thank goodness He does forgive us. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. If it wasn't for His grace, where would we be? Sheila, you got it?
I got it. Romans 3:21-26. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith of Jesus Christ, unto all and upon all them that believe, for there is no difference. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Paul follows up his argument that all are guilty before God and in need of forgiveness with the solution of this problem. Although none would be right before God by maintaining the law's demands, the law and the prophets bore witness to the righteousness of God. This means the entire Old Testament pointed to a righteousness of God that came apart from being the law. Rather than this righteousness being appropriated through the law, it is granted to someone based on both the faithfulness of Jesus Christ and His mission of salvation, as well as his personal faith in Jesus Christ. Thus, to those who believe that Jesus redeemed them from the curse of the law, God grants righteousness, that is, the right standing of sinners before a holy God. This is needed because all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. In fact, this is the very reason that Christ had died and why the righteousness of God is appropriated only by faith. No one could do a thing to earn God's righteousness. Sinners owed God a great debt, one they could never pay in full. So Christ paid the redemption price and made all who believed in Him propitious or favorable before God. In doing so, God was shown to be just the justifier of the one who has faith in Christ.
All are guilty before God and in need of forgiveness, and that's what He offers us through grace. The Jew, I beg your pardon? Right. Right. We were born in sin. Jewish people are guilty before God just as Gentiles are. Keeping the law, though, could not make one righteous before God, even though he gave us, remember, the Ten Commandments identified sin to these people because they had no idea they were sinning. They were doing whatever they wanted to do, the right and the wrong in their own perspective. Keeping the law could not make them righteous before God. But it identified sin as to what it was. Christ had to die, and why the righteousness of God is appropriated only by faith. He had to die for all of us. He had to pay the price for all of us. No one could do a thing to earn God's righteousness. It was something Christ had to do for each person. For each individual in this room, he did it for you. He took God's punishment against sin so that sinners would not have to do so. We couldn't have paid what he paid. I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have been beat within an inch of my life. I couldn't have stood having my hair tore out, thorns pressed into my head, spit on, slapped in the face. I couldn't have done that. He did that for me. And if you ever see the Passion of the Christ, I don't know what kind of man Caviezel is. I don't know. But he could not have portrayed Jesus any better. To me, seeing what he went through, I buried my head in Richard's shoulder and I cried and cried and cried because I felt and knew he did that just for me. No. John Caviezel. Yeah. I didn't know that. That makes me feel better. That it made an impression on him. Christ paid the redemption price and made all who believed in him favorable before God. He said, hey, I'm going to do this for you so that God will forgive you. The full force of God's anger against sin was poured out on his Son instead of on a sinful humanity. That just, I don't know, it does something to me. This showed God to be just in not allowing sin to continue unpunished. I mean, there's a price to pay for sin. Those who have faith in Christ, they're forgiven and they're saved from this. I'm sorry. After the 2017 NFL season, the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. Many on that team professed faith, studied, and prayed together. One headline of that time reads, Nick Foles plans to become a pastor after football career. The quarterback is enrolled in seminary to prepare himself for that future. The article highlights other players who are maturing in their faith. This is simply the way Nick is becoming what God has for him to be. I meant to look him up and see if he went on or is this just that? I don't know. I'm going to look him up when I get home. But to see if he was faithful and if he went on, I don't know. Anybody else know? Well, we were. We're not anymore. I read this in a book. You know, Richard and I are big time readers. And if I'm not reading it in a book, I'm reading it on Facebook or somewhere else. And a lot of it in the Bible. And this is why I'm grateful that they asked if I would teach Sunday school, because I have learned so much. You know, you think you know a lot, you don't. You can always learn, because nobody knows everything. But I was reading a book about the woman who started the angel tree. And I did not know that these children that they put on this angel tree, that those are children of prisoners in the women's prison. These are their children that we're buying gifts for. And in this book, she tells, man, she was around her, but in prison, this woman mentored her, and she got saved, and this woman from a high society place over in Homewood came and mentored her so that she could become what she's become. And it was really an eye-opener. I think I brought the book for the library. It's called A Rogue Angel. That's what it's called. But in that book, I read something that she wrote, and it has bared on my mind. It said, grace is sometimes just too easy. We think it's too easy for God. Sometimes if we beat ourselves up enough, we think we can somehow do penance and really feel cleaned. But that makes it all about us, rather than just accept God's gift of grace. Sometimes we think we got to clean ourselves up for God to love us, but He loves us anyway. That's right. That's right. So, you want to read the call to discipleship?
We typically focus on large societal issues affecting the whole nation or world. Unfortunately, technology makes anything available to us instantaneously. If we were living only 100 or 200 years ago, it might have taken weeks for news to reach us from other regions, or it might never have reached us. Without technology, we would be bound to engage in the local issues of our society. That would be our news. That would be where we would have the most influence. The scriptures reveal God's message to society, often localized. God may give us a prophetic voice that extends beyond our circles at times. However, we may be evading real connection with our neighbors when we talk only about news that does not intersect with our everyday lives.
Next week, we're going to study about cultures and what God expects. And we have different cultures. You remember when they were building that tower to reach God, and He divided the people, and it was called the Tower of Babel, because all these people were babbling and they couldn't understand each other. But God wants us to have our own culture. He wants us to be separate from each other. As far as, I'm not Italian. I don't do what Italian people do. I may eat some of their food. I may eat some Mexican food. That don't mean that I have the Mexican culture or history. And that's the big thing is their history. They guard their history, and we don't blame them. I'll leave it like that.